Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is...
Corey GeoCities Knockreiner. Let's go back
Corey.
in time and make some in-construction websites.
GeoCities.
With lots of animated GIFs, or GIFs, depending on your preference.
Corey coming to us not with just an old hit from a website hosting, but also an internet service from the early 1990s as well too, supposedly. On today's episode, please forgive me, I'm still recovering from a cold, and Corey is 18 hours ahead of me in New Zealand.
20, I believe. You, 18 ahead of you, 20 in front of my time zone.
Pretty nuts. But Corey coming to the future is going to help us discuss a couple of news stories from the past week.
I know what's going to happen, Mark.
Who got hacked? Please tell us.
Not us, at least for one more day.
Good. On today's episode, we will cover the Chinese state-sponsored attack against 3 large telcos in the U.S., and then an attack against the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine itself. With that, let's go ahead and, time travel our way in. So let's start this week with the first story, which actually started brewing up, I think, earlier in the month, where about a week and a half ago, several news organizations reported a China-backed threat actor had breached at least 3 major U.S. telecommunications providers in an attempt to discover Chinese targets of American surveillance. I think the story broke with a Wall Street Journal article. I am not a Wall Street Journal subscriber, so I got it from Ars Technica and Washington Post. But they claimed that the networks owned by Verizon, AT&T, and Lumen were all compromised, and the threat actors had access for several months and may still have had access at the point where the story was published, too. They attributed the attack to Salt Typhoon, which I guess we already said where it's from, but Corey, do you remember Typhoon?
Typhoon is always China.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Wait, no. Yeah, okay.
Yep, you are correct. So Salt Typhoon, which is a Chinese intelligence service, or at least Chinese intelligence-backed APT, that's been active since around 2020 or so. The report states that Salt Typhoon exfiltrated data from Verizon's networks by reconfiguring a Cisco router, or at least a couple Cisco routers. They also indicated it's possible that the U.S. wiretapping system was penetrated. It was at least targeted, but they have not confirmed if it was successfully compromised or not.
That is interesting, by the way, because you have to... I do think we know that the authorities in our country work with the government. There's even systems like Einstein, which is kind of the government's fancy-ass IPS system, intrusion prevention or intrusion detection system, that I think they offer to put in front of private businesses. And besides government entities, they might put in front of ISPs as well. But obviously for wiretaps, they must work with ISPs. So it's interesting to see nation states might have access to those type of government collaborations at their location.
Yeah, let's actually talk about that for a second. So there's the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA as it's called, which was originally passed decades ago in the world of hard, physical wiretaps against lug nuts against a phone line in order to listen into calls. It was updated in, I think, 2021 or 2022 after the 9/11 terrorist attacks by a Supreme Court case that validated it can be used for digital wiretaps as well, too. And now that is the enforcement mechanism for U.S. law enforcement and national security agencies to effectively demand the ability to do quick wiretaps with telco providers in the U.S. And I guess to support those lawful court orders as they're supposed to be, these telcos have effectively built in backdoors that they can turn on, I guess, when they're needed.
Hopefully they're not running all the time, but it's like a quick on-off button if they get a subpoena that they have to lawfully execute.
Exactly. And there's different types of wiretaps or court-ordered actions that law enforcement and national security can take. So There's simple like pen register trap and trace, basically telling you source and destination and even protocol usage for things. But in theory, there's ways to siphon off entire like actual packets, like effectively packet capture an entire connection, I would imagine. I'm very curious, like, I'm trying to think in my head how that would actually work. Like, how could you route a single connection without potentially? I mean, you could obviously run a packet capture with the right filter to gather certain things if they're literally just using Wireshark, which I'm sure they're not. But I imagine there's some robust system in place to facilitate these types of requests, especially from the National Security Agency side, where they probably do want full packet captures because their quantum computer can just decrypt all of our AES encryption anyway, right?
Likely. Hopefully not AAS2, but who knows with NASA or
But
NSA.
the but the NASA is spying on us
I
too.
know.
Why do you think they have all those satellites? But I mean, the reality is, like, backdoors is what they effectively are. Like, yes, it's a controlled backdoor that's only authorized by court ordered, like law enforcement can use in very controlled circumstances. But they're a pretty high risk target. Like, basically anything that grants elevated access by circumventing like the controls you would otherwise have in place to prevent people from accessing that introduces risk. And
Absolutely.
I'm not surprised that like hostile nation states are trying to target that infrastructure. And it sounds like China had a specific motive here, like to go after, figure out who the NSA and the CIA were trying to spy on in the first case. Like,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to extend this a little unplanned to things like a cryptography too. Like there's this argument between, argument's a strong word, but a debate between intelligence agencies and the security community to do like I think everyone agrees that we do want ethical, lawful organizations to have the tools they need to catch true bad actors. And we also want them to do it legally. But to your point, the back doors, making it easy. So whether we're talking about wiretapping ISPs or we're talking about making really strong encryption algorithms that are three key algorithms because an intelligence agency wants a backdoor, their argument is they absolutely need it and we shouldn't be concerned about it because they're the good guys. But I think this is a good example of whether we're talking about wiretapping or encryption. Our argument against this isn't necessarily that we don't trust the intelligence agencies to do things lawfully and legally and go after bad guys. It is that risk you mentioned. It is the fact that when you have an easy way for a third party to essentially break the security that the other two parties think they have, it's going to be a huge target. And no matter how good an intelligence agency is from any country, they've all made mistakes. I mean, NSA and the CIA have leaked things. You know, we've gotten their exploit tools because they were attacked by bad guys. They used to the whole. It goes the same with stockpiling vulnerabilities in big applications. You know, their argument is they want to keep a Windows 11 zero day in case they have to attack one of our adversaries, but they've already lost zero day to other countries that have been used to attack the world. So I think it's a difficult problem. I'm not. I think authorities need to have the wiretaps, but having these, and I also get that in investigations, time is of utmost importance. But I do think you bring up a great point that backdoors are dangerous. And when the security community complains about them, it isn't just because we're trying to hide from intelligence agencies or we think they're doing a bad job or we don't believe they need tools. It's because the way they implement these tools often has really big risks that can get in the wrong hands too. So the question is, does the power they get from it really outweigh the power adversaries can have if they use it against us? So it's a very gray, nuanced discussion, but I also don't think they should be backdooring cryptography either, is what I'm kind of pulling this into.
yeah,
So even though this is a whole different topic, I think it shows the nuance for why the security industry aren't just toddlers being mad at the intelligence agency. Unfortunately, they failed quite a few times protecting their own tools. And this type of thing happens. Granted, do remember this is in the early stages of news, so we don't know the complete details yet.
yeah. And it's honestly like Our telecommunications infrastructure is considered a critical infrastructure sector. It's one of the 18 that CISA is responsible for securing in the United States. And like these wiretapping backdoors or any weakness intentionally introduced in the system, it goes against some of
Yeah.
like CISA's own like secure by design initiatives as well too, when you're intentionally making something weaker or easier to access.
Yeah, it feels
But
kind of hypocritical to say that we're requiring all private companies to follow secure by design and always kill vulnerabilities and weaknesses and not have intentional hard coded backdoors unless it's us and we need it.
exactly. Yes, exactly. But I mean, that said, like you said, the story is still new, and it doesn't sound like it was necessarily the like wiretapping infrastructure that caused the incident. It sounds like it was more that's the target of
Routing.
the incident, as China's trying to figure out who exactly, which of their citizens are being spied on by U.S. intelligence right now. This
I
is
do
one.
say it's a, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was saying this is one where it actually does seem to have stirred a hornet's nest. I know Senator Warner, who I think is out of Oregon, very privacy conscious member of the legislative branch of the government, is already like calling for effectively an inquisition into this incident.
Wow.
And it sounds like we'll probably, I mean, obviously they're not going to spill all of their details on how this system works. It's, I bet, a large portion of it is probably classified, but we may get some outcome from this event that sheds a light on exactly how these tools are used and what level of risk they may actually introduce into our critical infrastructure. What were you going to say though?
I was just going to say, besides the whole conversation about backdoors, the other thing you should just remember is to me, this is an example of two other things. It's that nation state hacking or state sponsored hacking is kind of going private. While they might be targeting government targets, like to your point, if we're speculating it, they might be targeting wiretaps specifically to see what the government is doing. These are the same private organizations we use to do our telco. So realize that the days of nation state or state sponsored attacks only affecting huge enterprises are gone. And it's just another example of why the supply chain is such a big deal. Like all our technologies and all our connections are interconnected. You know, we are not these islands on our own. We use a lot of other people's technology and things like, I mean, when they target ISPs, they're really targeting all of us in a way. So just other things to think about as you're doing security.
Yeah, to put it simply, I think to summarize what you said, no matter what we do, we will always get hacked. So nothing matters.
Wow,
Correct?
more good news from the 443 Security Podcast.
Now, speaking of good news, let's wait, no, this is terrible news. Moving on. Last week, the Internet Archive, which is the home of the Wayback Machine, which archives web pages dating back to basically the founding of the internet, suffered a security incident that became apparent when users were given a pop-up message that said, quote, "Have you ever felt like the Internet Archive is run on sticks and is constantly on the verge of suffering a catastrophic security breach? It just happened. See 31 million of you on Have I Been Pwned." So later that day, the Internet Archive's founder, Brewster Kahle, posted a summary on Twitter stating, "What we know, there was a DDoS attack that we fended off for now. There was a defacement of our website via a JavaScript library, a breach of usernames, emails, and salted encrypted passwords. And what we've done, we've disabled the JavaScript library, scrubbed systems, upgrading security, and we will share more as we know it." Shortly after that, Troy Hunt, who runs the Have I Been Pwned website, posted his timeline events. Apparently, he received the dump of usernames and passwords that were stolen on September 30th, but because he was traveling and he didn't realize the significance of it, he didn't actually look at it until October 5th. At which point, he in his timeline he goes, "Whoa!" He got in contact with someone at the Internet Archive on the 6th, advising him he was going to load it in 72 hours, asked them for a disclosure notice on their site to let people know that they'd been hacked. And then on October 9th, the Internet Archive ended up getting defaced and suffered a DDoS attack right as Troy Hunt was loading the data into the Have I Been Pwned archive. He noted that the timing seemed to be, it was actually entirely coincidental of him loading it in right as the site was getting DDoSed and had the defacement from the JavaScript library, but it was purely coincidental. So before moving on to the folks that claimed attribution for this, like I don't know about you, Corey, but I use the Internet Archive at least like on a weekly basis. It's a great source of open source intelligence of like what websites used to have, the content that used to be on them. You can go find it's actually so anytime GitHub goes and does a takedown for like a proof of concept bit of source code, I generally go on the Wayback Machine and go find the source code from there because it's probably been archived by someone. It's an extremely useful tool that a lot of technology, like IT and security practitioners, use every day. So having it compromised like this was a pretty big deal in at least our circle.
I see. I wasn't sure at first until it came out the hashed password parts. Not so like you. I use the Internet Archive regularly. I actually wouldn't say it every week, but there's often something I'm looking for that I know is gone, and I can go back there and look. I've even gone back to some of old WatchGuard sites to show content that we no longer have up. So it's very
Yeah.
useful. But the Internet Archive is an archive of public content, right? It's all of this, and I don't think it. I think it respected spider rules, so it should mostly just be archives of web pages that anyone could have publicly got to forever. So
Mhm.
at first, I wasn't sure. Excuse me, like the risk of it. These were sites that were publicly up long ago. So what are you really getting if you get the database of all of that web content from the past? But of course, Troy Hunt did change that a little bit. So yeah, it is a bigger breach than I thought. I think, although I think like 53% was it of the hash stuff we already knew about already is on the underground. But that made it a bigger deal than I thought. But at first, I kind of was so what. This is kind of they're openly sharing this information when it's not breached. So why do you really care if it's public
The
now to
the
everyone?
the breached usernames and passwords actually were the least of my concerns. I was thinking like from a potential watering hole attack, if they weren't so verbose and like noisy about what they did with that little pop-up, like being able to run arbitrary malicious JavaScript on a website that a
That
lot of
is a big
IT and
deal.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, they made themselves known right away. If this was a hack that we didn't know about and they simply used their access to Internet Archive to inject code, that would have been a horrible watering hole attack that would have caught many, many people over time. So I absolutely, that is an absolute valid point. But once we knew about it, I
yep.
mean, it's obvious they're not doing that. So I didn't even think about that likelihood until, you know, this podcast and you're mentioning it.
So let's talk about the folks that claimed attribution for it, though. There was an account on Twitter, and yeah, I know I'm still calling it Twitter, called SN underscore Black Meta. I think they also go by SN Dark Meta, who are effectively like pro-Palestinian hacktivists that try and launch attacks to drum up. I don't know if interest is the right word, but awareness for they say are like the plights that are being faced by Palestinians. They released this like I don't know, not paragraph, like book long statement after the fact. And one of the paragraphs there was our past targets include significant operations against 7 Israeli banks. We even impacted critical services such as hospitals where the Israeli prime minister was undergoing heart surgery. Just a few months ago, we made headlines by launching a remarkable attack on Radware and the United Arab Emirates banks, generating an astounding 14.5 million requests per second. This shows and demonstrates our strength, determination, and the strategic nature of our actions. So, this is the organization that decided to go after the Internet Archives and apparently steal user info and deface it. Actually, that said, one thing that they were clear about there, it is not entirely clear if the folks that did the DDoS and defacement are the same ones that stole the data out of that site. That hasn't been confirmed yet. The hacktivists are at least claiming
And
credit for
what is
that.
their motive for stealing the like to me, yeah, the stealing the data, the password data is interesting. But maybe they're just using that to further their hacktivist attacks, not really
Yep.
to become criminal malware people. If I'm thinking like a hacktivist, whether or not you believe in their message of Palestine is being too attacked right now, it's a smart hacktivist attack. I mean, and really the defacement is the best thing. If you have something like the Internet Archive, which is a popular attack, we've just mentioned it would be a very popular watering hole. You have your pro-Palestine message there. I'm not saying that we support hacktivism of any. It's still illegal hacking, but to me, they're not necessarily trying to get malware on everyone right now. So yeah, it is interesting that hacktivism is coming back. It is interesting that they stole passwords too, because that could suggest more criminal stuff. But maybe they're just trying to build their arsenal of, intelligence that they can continue their more defacement style, get the message out hacks.
And as of this recording, the Wayback Machine is at least back online in read only capacity. The other Internet Archive services, like their book lending service, their media archives, and their software archives, are still offline. And they said their web crawlers are still offline, and they're not accepting user supplied page captures as well yet either. So they're
So I
slowly
guess they're going to
restoring
have a little bit
services.
of a gap. If in 20 years we want to see what happens this week, we might miss it.
It's a good point. I wonder if, I mean, I imagine users can probably buffer the
Post,
uploads,
yeah,
maybe, but yeah,
yeah.
crap. How are we going to
Like
know what happened the first 2 weeks of October when we look back in the year 2050?
it'd be a mystery, like
I
when
gotta
the
say,
internet didn't exist.
it is genuinely fun using the Wayback Machine to go to, like you mentioned, like WatchGuard's website from 2010 or whatever, or 2005. Like, it's pretty fun going back and seeing how the
Have you ever
internet used
gone
to look
like,
like 20 years
yeah?
ago.
Have you ever looked at some old GeoCities sites? Remember Geos? Oh my God, just seeing the design in the 90s, the late 90s and 2000s. Ugh.
I think I still have a 500 gigabyte or so zip archive with like supposedly every GeoCities website ever made that had been scraped before it was shut down. I used to have a
Yeah, some
GeoCities
interesting
site.
stuff.
It hosted all of my Pokemon cheat code tips that I had as little 12 or 13-year-old Mark was learning how to do web design.
As much as I make fun of it now, I think you weren't a cool technical kid if you didn't have a GeoCity site window. So I think all of us did.
Exactly. Man, that's right. I should explain to my kids what GeoCities is one of these days. GeoCities was past tense. But
Yeah.
anyways, it sounds like the Internet Archive is working to restore service as they make sure they've eradicated the threat entirely. And I guess if you were a Internet Archive user, if you had an account with them for whatever purpose,
Yeah.
now is probably the
Change your
time to go
password.
reset your credential. But yeah, well, like I said earlier in the first story, I think the best way to make sure we don't get hacked is just turn everything off and stop using the internet,
Yeah.
and
Get the
problem solved.
scissors. Go up in the
Snip, snip.
mountain, grow a beard, live off the river and the land.
It's feeling more appealing every single week. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Instagram at watchguard_technologies. Thanks again for listening, and you will hear from us next week.
Peace.
Peace.